legislation. It has been 5 years since the government started the so-called trial of the cashless debit card. It hasn't worked. The government has provided no evidence that it does work, and not enough community support is obvious. The government has spent $2.5 million on a University of Adelaide report they refused to release, and this raises enormous suspicion about the content of that particular report. The member for Bass in this place, a member of the government, said, applying a broad brush to all recipients in the current sites, no matter their circumstances, is harmful and unhelpful. There is a high level of anxiety that exists elsewhere in the country beyond the trial sites in the northern Tasmanian community that I proudly represent. I have had distressed people, including pensioners, ask me if they will end up having their income managed. And with the amount of time and money spent in addressing the current challenges of this program, it is difficult to believe that this program will end up with these current sites. Last night, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the Senate, the Minister was repeatedly asked and repeatedly refused to give a guarantee that this card would not be expanded, both geographically and to other Centrelink recipients on other payments. Matt Canavan earlier in the week called for a national rollout, and I'll talk about that in a little while. It is clear there is a plan for a national rollout. Technology working groups with the banks, supermarkets and Australia Post have been established. And the government has spent $3 million improving technology. The only reason to do this is if you are planning a national rollout to more places and more people. The member for Bass in this place also said, I also have a fundamental problem with how this program and this legislation aligns with my own principles. As a Liberal, I believe in personal and individual responsibility. It's the very foundation of our core principles. She went on to say we work towards a lean government that minimises interference in daily lives. Forcing the cashless debit card program onto people unless or until they can prove to the government that they can manage their own finances is antithetical to these principles. Do these principles only apply if you're poor? I believe we are better than that. Here ends the quote from the member for Bass. Senator Lambie in the Senate said last night, but I've always said that to the government, if you want to make this thing happen, you can't let the card be the only thing you do. It's not a magic wand. You can't wave it at people and expect things to somehow get better, because the problems that you see in the trial sites need a lot more than the cashless debit card to fix. And that's what I heard every time I went to the trial sites. I heard it in the Northern Territory too. Those people up there can't live better lives with just the cashless debit card. They need jobs, they need medical facilities, they need counsellors, and they need skills training. Senator Patrick last night said in the other place, in the end, weighing up all the evidence, the difficulty for me is that the government has not made out its case. When I balance up everything I've seen, unfortunately, the data to support the concept that the card will achieve what is intended to achieve is not there. The government has made a mistake, let me assure you, has made a mistake pressing ahead with this watered-down bill. The government's amendments are a back down and an acknowledgement that there is community anxiety about this card. It is a kick and an affront to those thousands of Australians who have done nothing wrong. Thousands of Australians that have done nothing wrong. This government has
Order.
consistently
The member
failed
for
to prove
Barton's
this
time
work.
has expired. I thank the member for Barton for her contribution, and the question is that the amendments be agreed to, and I call the member for Barton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government has consistently failed to prove this works. It has refused to release the much anticipated $2.5 million University of Adelaide evaluation. This has caused significant hardship on people placed on this card. Many have been prevented from purchasing basics and essentials at affordable prices. It is structurally racist, with 2/3 of participants being First Nations people, 83% in the Northern Territory, 82% in East Kimberley. You only need to read Bridget Archer's speech to the Parliament to be reminded of the anxiety in the community about this card. The question now is, what happens next? It is clear that the government is determined to expand this card a national rollout. The Prime Minister has foreshadowed it. The Social Service Minister has foreshadowed it. Matt Canavan and Andrew Wallace are outright calling for a national rollout. Well, where next? Tasmania? And who next? Pensioners. The government needs to learn and listen. Continuing this policy is a massive mistake, and it's been brought upon the government by itself. The original legislation passed the House of Representatives by one. The watered-down legislation passed the Senate last night by one. Hardly a ringing endorsement. Can I finish up, Madam Deputy Speaker, by saying the government was so exercised to get something passed. The legislation last night was what they got through. The original legislation that was sitting there in the minister's bottom drawer was more draconian, and that sat there. The government was caught out, not understanding community sentiment and resistance to this particular measure. Can I finish up by saying extremely clearly to the House, through you, Madam Deputy Speaker, Labor will continue to oppose this card. Labor will continue to oppose this legislation. Mandatory income management does not work.
I thank the member for Barton for her contribution. The question is that the amendments be agreed to, and I call the member for Melbourne.
Thank you, Speaker.